Do you feel like you're starting to lose who you really are because you keep focusing on the demands of the external world and you're losing your connection to your inner core? Or on the other extreme, do you start to feel more and more lifeless despite your otherwise high energy or high mental activity? Then keep watching this video because I will tell you how this is related to extroversion loops or the lack thereof and what to do about it. Okay, welcome back to Type Evolution, where we talk about how to evolve with our personality type. So I made a video about introversion loops and introverted problems before, so watch that if you're an introvert or if you are currently suffering from introversion loops. But this video is about extroversion loops. First of all, what is the foundation of extroversion? Extroverts are usually characterized by an aversion to using their introverted functions. Extroverts generally, because they are extroverts, prefer using extroverted functions. But then usually they will mostly use their first function. Sometimes they will either use their tertiary in MBTI, or they will oftentimes also use what's called demonstrative in socionics. It is the extroverted function that is based on your, in MBTI, third letter. So let's say ENFP, what is the case for the average ENFP is that they will mostly use their extroverted intuition, extroverted feeling based on the F, and sometimes tertiary TE. And of course they can also use the other functions, but that is then a sign that they are too unhealthy usually. If you're an extrovert like that and you're currently experiencing what I described in the beginning, you are starting to feel like you're losing who you really are or your true inner core. You're starting to lose the sense of yourself. It's like you're constantly focusing on just engaging with the external world, being present in it, interacting with it. Your mind is always circulating around things related to things outside of yourself. But you start to think, okay, what is actually in me? You don't take any time for yourself, basically. The solution to that is going into your introverted function. I already mentioned it in the previous video. The solution is to go into your second function a bit more often. And there is a misconception, I also talked about that in the previous video, where people think, oh, okay, I can actually focus a lot on my inferior function. I use that a lot and I'm really in touch with it. But they don't understand that the inferior function is, at least usually in the average case, way too weak to be accessed naturally. Usually they're mistyping their second function as their inferior function. So even with ENFPs, what can happen is, or ESFPs, they can end up mistyping their secondary FI as being FI inferior. Because, like I said, they are often way more concerned with the external world and engaging with it. So they might focus too much on either NE or SE and TE and FE sometimes. So then they get really caught up in it and they forget connecting with their own FI. This is usually what makes a personality more balanced or more self-fulfilled. You can use the other functions, but you won't feel that much of this personal satisfaction if you only use those and not your first two functions. So I'm not saying to use FI all the time if you're an ENFP or ESFP, but to use it a bit more often if you notice that you're totally losing touch with it. It's even possible as an introvert to have so-called extroversion loops, and that can depend on your subtype. Usually people who have the secondary subtype as an introvert are what I call ambiverts in quotation marks, and they also are more inclined towards having the occasional extroversion loop. So this could also be the case if you're an introvert who is having an extroverted loop. You also need to go to an introverted function, in your case the first one. In the case of an extrovert, it's the second function. Okay, so what you do, your second function, as I said, FI for ENFP and ESFP, to tune into how do you personally feel about things. What is your personal, ethical, emotional take on it? Your personal standards, values, morals when it comes to human interactions, or how humanity should be, or how your personal relationships should be. And like I said, the occasional INFP or ISFP who is really caught up in some kind of weird extroversion loop with their second function, go back to the FI. Okay, let's say your second function is Introverted Intuition as an ENFJ or ENTJ. Focus more on observing the flow of events, observing how one event will lead to another, also tuning into the personal meaning of life, of certain things in the world, the purpose of things. Contemplate a bit more, okay, what is the purpose behind what I'm doing here? What is the purpose behind life? What is the purpose behind this and that? Also, picking up on certain symbolism and archetypes, creating personal meaning with personalized symbols can help you in aiding you with observing the flow of life or the flow of events, being attuned to that. Or going back to what I like to call the voice of wisdom, the inner voice. And for many people actually think that they are talking to God when they are doing that. But I noticed that ENTJs or ENFJs who are more religious, or even other types who have a stronger connection to NI, it can even be tertiary NI, that they think they are talking to God, but it's actually the inner voice of wisdom. It's the NI talking to you, talking to yourself, talking back to you. Like, what does this mean? What kind of lesson can I get out of this? How will this develop? Okay, let's say Introverted Thinking is your second function. So you're an ENTP or ESTP. In that case, go back to your own logical understanding of things, how you would logically analyze certain situations, putting certain things or experiences into logical frameworks, logical structures, creating certain systems or models that represent certain things that you have experienced or seen. So really tuning back into that. How can this be related to a model or system that I'm using myself? How is that logical? How does it make sense? How can it be connected to each other in a logical, coherent way? So this is for ENTP and ESTP. And ISTP and INTP, you can also do that if you have also been some kind of weird extroversion loop. If your second function is SI, that would mean occasionally tuning back into how you personally, physically experience certain things in the world, or just the experience of life. How does something internally, physically affect you and develop itself? So really going in touch with your inner physical experience. So let's say, how does something make me feel internally? So sometimes FI and SI can seem to overlap a little bit. So FI feeling is not the same as a physical experience, right? FI, I guess you could say it's a bit more emotional, but even FI doesn't have to literally be emotional. It can just be about standards, values, morals. And you do not necessarily have to be super emotional about it, but usually if you're an F-type, there will be some emotional charge to it. With SI, it's also kind of feeling based. This is also, I know that MBTI focuses a lot more on things like memory and the past. With SI, I think the past and the memory thing is correlated to SI, but it's not exactly SI. But the thing is with SI, the way how an object impacts them is way more personal than the case for an SE user. So it can really have a big impact, and this is why, like I said, impressionistic, it can imprint itself on the person, and then they will have these nostalgic memories in the past, right, to certain events they have experienced in the sensorial world. And then they will conjure it up sometimes, or they will have this connection to it. And if it's unhealthy, then they will be needlessly nostalgic and really depressive nostalgic in a certain weird way. I describe this more on my blog, typevolution.com, when you look at light and dark side of the cognitive functions. So this is generally my advice, but it's important that you do not only tune into those functions based on your personality type, but you also do it in the light side. If you are tuning into those functions from the dark side, on some level it's gonna alleviate some kind of amount of stress, but you will accumulate more stress later. Even if you are really stressed out and you wanna kind of reach some level of peace or something, if you go into these functions but from a dark side, like from the worst possible angle, it's not gonna help you that much. So in that case, really figure out what is the light side example of these functions and go more into the light example rather than the dark one. Okay, and what to avoid? Obviously for the extroverts, what you should avoid, you should still avoid going too much into introverted functions, because this is not the purpose of your personality type. This is not what your personality is designed to be. Well, design in quotation marks. It's just not how it is. So you will do yourself not a favor if you do it too much, if you go into your introverted functions too much at the expense of your extroverted function. Even in the case of your second function, even that you can overdo, and then you will feel kind of lifeless. It's a bit weird what I see with extroverts when they go into their introverted function too much, even if it's the second one, which is generally a good idea, but if they do it too much, they also experience some kind of draining, but they don't really seem, it's like a paradox to me, because on one hand they seem lifeless, but at the same time there's all this energy brewing underneath that is not getting applied or released, so they kind of wither like a flower or something. With introverts, it's more straightforward. Yeah, if an introvert uses their extroverted functions too much, they become drained and they also lose their energy and they have to be by themselves to recharge. With an extrovert who is going too much into the introverted side, they also lose their power, basically. They lose their brilliance, they lose their charge, and they also kind of wither and go downhill. So yeah, and like I said, even if it's your second function, that can still be a problem. Once again, I'm pretty sure this is why many people mistype their second function as their inferior, because of this weird thing that can happen. Okay, so that would not be good. And then of course, any other kind of introverted function that you overdo is not going to be good. That can also drain you. Even, like I said, using an extroverted function that you do not value or that is not a strength. So in the case of ENFP, that would be using Extroverted Sensing. I talked more about this in my stress role versus inferior video, where I talk about the stress function in socionics. In the case of ENFP, that is SE. In the case of ESFP, that is NE. In the case of ENFJ, that is TE. So if you use that function, you're going to stress yourself out as well, even though it's an extroverted function. So this is also going to kind of make you lifeless or drain you. And yeah, and the worst you can do is obsessing over using not even your inferior function, but even though that's also not the best idea, but focusing on the function that is not part of the MBTI 4 functions, and that is introverted and the opposite to your second function. So in the case of ENFP and ESFP, that would be focusing way too much on TI. That is also gonna really dim your shine, basically. Okay, so if you want me to type you, or if you want me to coach you based on your personal situation, or if you want to just ask questions, which I call type consulting, you can find the information down below, and also typelution.com/services. And see you in the next video. Okay, bye!